Ladies and gentlemen, to this video lesson about first civilizations of humanity. I am Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on this journey. Now, we're going to do this in 3 parts. So this particular video is part 1 of 3. So without further ado, here we go. Now, as we talked about in the last lesson, it's important to have things to help us focus our studying and to help us focus our attention. So here, I've listed the key ideas just so you have a sense of what's going to be covered in this series of video lessons. So we're going to start with historical thinking skills. That's going to be pretty key. Now, by this point, you should have already watched a video about historical thinking skills. So this should be review for you. Then we're going to move into characteristics of civilizations. I'm going to teach you some fun little acronyms known as PEGs and Persia that'll help you remember key things from world history. And then finally, we are going to get into the nitty-gritty, the finer details of Mesopotamia. All right, so the key questions that our focus questions that we want to keep in mind for this lesson are: what are the historical thinking skills? So what are they? And you should be able to define them and understand how to use them. Then we're going to discuss what are pegs in Persia. We're going to talk about how we use those also. And we're also going to discuss the characteristics of the early civilizations of Mesopotamia. So what characteristics distinguish or set apart and make them different from each other? Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. Those are going to be the 4 key ones. I'll talk about a few others, but if you have to triage, so to speak, then those are the big 4 you want to keep in mind. All right, so now let me move my little box of my face here so we can see everything. I'm going to move myself right up here. There we go. Okay, so there are 5 skills. All right, count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, they are necessary for the study of history, and I can't claim originality on these. This is from the UCLA National Center for History in the Schools. It's a great website, and we're going to be doing some additional work with them this year. So the first skill is chronological thinking. Okay, that's looking at putting things in time order. If you don't understand the order of events, then you're not going to be able to arrive at the significance of events. You're not going to actually be able to make the next step to the next historical thinking skill of historical comprehension. And that's actually being able to understand the history that you're studying. I have some more details on the next slide. Analysis and interpretation is the third. Examining historical issues is the fourth, and historical research is the fifth. Now, as we've talked about in previous lessons, the historical issues and research, those can be swapped out depending on what stage of the process you're in. Sometimes the research comes first, and then you learn about problems or issues in history that you want to discover. And other times you kind of walk in saying, well, I actually, this is the issue I want to look at. And then you have that in mind already, and then you proceed to do the research so that you can understand. All right, so now I'm going to move my box down again, my little self over here. I'm just going to put me right over there. That looks good. Okay, so chronological thinking is all about putting events and people in time order, right? We talked about that on the previous slide. We also need to move into historical comprehension, and there's a couple of important points here. You want to understand the historical source that you're looking at, okay? You also need to make sure that you place whatever source or person or civilization that you're studying in their proper historical context, okay? When we're talking about history, being objective, okay, we cannot judge previous societies based on our current modern context, okay? They existed in an entirely different environment, totally different civilization, totally different society. We need to judge them on their own merits, on their own basis. Now, that doesn't mean we don't personally have opinions about whether Hammurabi was good times or whether he was not. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, we can't look at Hammurabi and say he was an evil guy. Historians that's not what historians do. Historians want to understand how and why of events. Okay, that's what we focus in on. So the value judgments, that's best left for other disciplines. All right, so the third step, and I would argue this is actually the most important, because without doing that one, none of the other ones are going to come together. So analysis, the basic definition of that is breaking something down into parts and then understanding the relationship between those parts. Okay, and the interpretation stage, you're challenging historical argument and you're forming your own arguments about history. So you're not just accepting, okay, well, the textbook tells me that this is, that Hammurabi was an effective leader. You need to do your own research. You need to learn on your own so that you can go back and say, well, I think Hammurabi was an effective leader because of this and this, as opposed to just reading it verbatim in a textbook. You want to form your own opinions about this. Now, historical research capabilities, that's formulating historical questions. You're interrogating, you're investigating and questioning historical evidence, and you always need to support all of your opinions with evidence. It's not like, well, I feel like that this is the case. No, 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 no. There's no feeling. We don't care about feelings here. No, 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 no. You actually must have evidence for these ideas that come into your brain. Okay? Oh, evidence, evidence, evidence. Which brings us into historical issues. You want to identify issues and problems of the past, and then you want to take that knowledge and evaluate history. And you want to form well-reasoned opinions that, again, are based on evidence, evidentiary support. Very important, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so PEGS. I'm going to bring myself back down here. All right, so this is an acronym that helps you understand what key parts of a civilization you need to know about. So the first one is P for political, then we have E for economic, G for geography, and S for social. All right, this one is required. This acronym is required. You must memorize this and be able to identify the political organization of a civilization, its economic system, its geography, and its social aspects. Okay, so for every civilization we study, you're going to need to know about these things. Okay, so what is politics? So politics is answering the question of who has power, who has control. So who controls what? What type of government do they have? Do they have a king? Do the citizens directly participate in the governing? Is it just a group of really rich or important people that make decisions? What type of government do they have? And anything that has to do with laws or war, diplomacy, that's going to fall under the political box, if you will. Economics, we're looking at the type of economic system. What type of economy do they have? Is it just a very traditional bartering system where, well, I have this and you have that and you need this and I need that, so we trade? Is it simple like that? Or has the civilization evolved to have actual money where you're not trading this for that? You're saying, okay, I want this and I have this cash, I'm going to give it to you. Okay. How do people make a living? What kinds of professions are there? Do people just farm for themselves? Do they just make things for themselves and just subsist that way? Or is there a lot of trade going on where individuals in the society can specialize? They can focus on one particular skill or one particular job. These are important things we need to know about. Geography, where is it? We do need to know where it is in the world because that's going to help us understand how and why things happen. We need to know what kind of land they have. What's a good word for that is topography. What kind of landmass is there? Is it mountainous? Is there a lot of deserts? Is it ocean? Do we have a lot of forests? Like what kind of environment are they living in? Things like that. And then the social part, very, very important. We want to look at what were their religious beliefs. Were they monotheistic, which means they only believed in one God, or were they polytheistic? They believed in many gods. What type of philosophies or intellectual ideas were floating about? Did they have a view of humanity and whether it was good or bad? These things we want to understand. What was their art like? Did art play a large role in their civilization, or was it kind of over there, we don't care so much? These are going to help answering these kinds of questions and filling in these boxes here, the PEGS, that's going to help us understand the civilization we're studying. Pardon me. So Persia. Now this is the more complicated one. So if you're feeling like PEGS is too simple and you want to advance, you want to challenge yourself, this would be the one to do. So it breaks these things down into additional letters. So the acronym is Persia. Political is who is in charge. Economic is how do we make a living. Religion involves what we believe. Social is how do we relate to one another. That can involve social classes as well. Intellectual and arts, how do we learn? How do we express ourselves? And let me move my little box up here real quick. And the area or the geography, how does where we live impact how we live? So this is a little bit more detailed, a little bit more complex. But if you're feeling like you'd like a challenge, feel free to break into this one. Rest assured, I will have extra credit questions based on this. So if you do feel like challenging yourself, you will have an opportunity to show that. All right, so I want to go over some key vocabulary really quick. Now, I am going to post this PowerPoint on the website so you can have access to it independent of this video lesson, but you can also pause it and write down these key vocabulary words. So you can read definitions. You're old enough, you don't need me to read to you. So you can pause the video, go ahead and write all of these down so that you understand what they are. The first word is empire. The next word is patriarchal. The third word is polytheistic. The fourth word is cuneiform. Okay? So from this slide, you want to copy down all those terms. Move me a little bit there. And then we have city-state, ziggurat, theocracy, and then that's more of a phrase than a word, but division of labor. So these words are also very important for you to learn for this unit. All right. So those are the key vocab words. Again, you can always rewind, you can go back, you can pause it, so that way you can get those definitions down. So before we get into the civilizations specifically themselves, we need to understand how civilizations develop at all. And like we learned in the prehistory video lessons, if you have a steady food supply, you can have civilization. Without a steady food supply, you're not going to be able to develop a civilization because you're going to be too focused on just finding food that you're not going to think about religion and politics and art. And like, you really can't focus on those things. You're just trying to eat, right? You're just trying to eat. So once you have this introduction of the steady food supply, that is what allows civilization to develop. So like a sub-focus question, why did Mesopotamia, or the region of Mesopotamia, become a thriving civilization? Well, the primary reason actually was that it was located along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Without water, there is no life, okay? So you can't farm and you can't have a consistent and steady food supply without access to water to irrigate your land and so that you can care for the crops and actually grow them effectively. So the fact that the Mesopotamian civilization grew out of in between the Tigris and Euphrates, that is what allowed it to develop in the first place. Now, characteristics of civilizations. What do you need to have in order to be considered a civilization? Because like we talked about, prehistory folks, they weren't really civilizations. They were early peoples and they had their little tribes and stuff, but we wouldn't call them civilizations. Why not? Well, they weren't particularly complex, all right? Civilizations all have cities, they have an organized government, they have religion, they have art, they have class divisions, or they have social classes, so like the rich, the middle class, the poor, or the royalty versus the nobility versus the common people and slaves. And they also have writing systems. So that right there, just the writing systems by itself, knocks out the prehistory civilizations. All right, so here's this. This map should look familiar to you. We explored this map in some previous video lessons, but this is going to give you an idea of what we're going to look at. Now, over the course of this unit, we're going to focus on Mesopotamia specifically. Sumer is part of that general vicinity, but Egypt is going to be the subject of another unit, as are the Indus River Valley and China. Okay, so these guys, this one, and this one are going to be the subject of separate units that we're going to talk about later on in the year. All right, so why were river valleys important? These are things we need to know. Like, why do we care about river valleys? Well, these three reasons. That's why we care about them. There was farming. You could have farming in river valleys. You could have trade, and you could have cities. Without those things, you don't have a civilization. So that's why river valleys were so important. And it's why the first human civilizations all developed in river valleys. This is very, very important to know. So again, you're going to need to write down those definitions, pause the video, write them down, and then keep going. All right, so that is the end of part 1, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you in part 2.